We can always improve in that area, especially us three, me, Kels, and AB. So we'll continue to work on that. But
there are times where you don't want your the defense to be able to set.
The Indiana Fever opened their 2025 preseason with a loss to the Dallas Wings. And while the final score was the most visible result, it was what happened over the course of those 40 minutes that gave the organization the clearest picture yet of where this team stands heading into the regular season. Caitlin Clark finished with 18 points, 8 assists, and 5 rebounds in her first professional game action of the year. By most standards, those are productive numbers for a guard managing a new roster and a new system under live game conditions. But the broader context made those numbers harder to evaluate in isolation. Clark was not fully healthy. She left the floor on multiple occasions to receive treatment on her back, and her movement in the second half reflected the physical limitation. That she posted those numbers under those circumstances says something about her baseline as a player. It also raises an immediate question about roster management and how the Fever intend to protect their most important asset across a 44-game schedule. The back issue is worth addressing directly because the temptation in situations like this is to minimize it as a preseason inconvenience. Clark herself has not made any dramatic public statements about the severity of the problem, but the visual evidence during the game, the trips off the floor, the reduced mobility at certain points were consistent with a player managing real discomfort rather than routine fatigue. The Fever will need to monitor this closely. Back problems in young players do not always resolve on their own, and a condensed WNBA schedule offers limited recovery windows. How Indiana handles this medically and operationally over the next several weeks will be one of the more consequential decisions the organization makes before the regular season tips off. What was equally notable was how Clark handled the pressure of the moment. This was her first professional game action in front of a sold-out arena with national media coverage and a fan base that has waited a full calendar year for this. The anxiety she acknowledged after the game was honest and frankly expected. First games carry a different psychological weight than practice or scrimmages. The systems are live, the mistakes are visible, and the margin for error is real. Clark processed that environment and still contributed at a high level. That is not a trivial thing. Young players frequently underperform in high-visibility debut situations. She did not. The assist total is worth examining separately. 8 assists in a preseason game reflects an active orientation toward creating for teammates rather than defaulting to individual scoring. For a player in a new offensive structure, learning when to push the pace and when to slow it down, that passing volume suggests she is operating with an awareness of the full floor. Some of those assists will have come from plays that broke down and recovered. Some will have come from designed actions that worked. The film will tell the Fever's coaching staff more than the box score, but the number itself is a meaningful signal. Kelsey Mitchell scored 30 points. That performance deserves to be acknowledged on its own terms, not reduced to a footnote in a larger narrative about the team's concerns. Mitchell has been one of the WNBA's more reliable scorers for several seasons, and a 30-point game, even in the preseason, reflects genuine offensive capability. More relevant to the question of team development is what that performance revealed about her role in the current offensive structure. When Clark was off the floor or operating at reduced capacity, Mitchell absorbed a larger portion of the offensive load and handled it effectively. That flexibility matters for a team that will, at various points across 44 games, need different players to be primary contributors depending on game situation and health. The relationship between Clark and Mitchell on the floor is one of the central developmental questions for this team. Both are players who can create off the dribble, both can function as primary ball handlers in certain situations, and both need clean looks to sustain their efficiency. The question of how those two skill sets integrate, not just in theory, but in the actual execution of pick-and-roll sequences, transition offense, and late clock situations is something this preseason is specifically designed to answer. One game does not resolve that question, but it opens the conversation. Aaliyah Boston's role in the offense was less defined in this game, which was partly a product of the game flow and partly a reflection of how the Fever's spacing and screening concepts are still being developed. Boston is a skilled interior player with the ability to finish in traffic, operate in the short roll, and make reads out of high ball screens. The Clark-Boston pick and roll is one of the most discussed offensive concepts for this team, and it appeared in the game, though not with the frequency or consistency that would maximize both players' strengths. Developing that action into something the Fever can rely on in high-leverage situations is going to be a process that extends well into the regular season. Both players have the skill sets to make it work. The timing and spacing refinements take repetition. One specific area that came up in post-game discussion and in viewer reaction was the quality of screening for Clark on the perimeter. Several possessions saw her working to create separation without the benefit of clean screens. which forced her into more difficult shot creation situations than necessary. This is partly a personnel issue. The Fever are still working out which lineups provide the best combination of screening, spacing, and defensive coverage, and partly a schematic one. Clark's value as a shooter is maximized when she has real separation. Getting her clean looks off movement, rather than requiring her to manufacture separation independently, is something Christy Sides and her staff will need to prioritize as they refine the offensive system. The defensive performance was the sharpest area of concern from this game. Dallas shot 59% from the field and over 50% from three-point range. Those numbers, in any context, indicate a defense that did not execute its assignments with sufficient consistency. The problems were multiple and distinct. There were rotation breakdowns where help defenders arrived late or to the wrong spot. There were individual lapses in transition where the Fever's coverage was disorganized. And there were moments where contest quality on three-point attempts was poor, a specific and correctable failure that becomes especially costly against a team like Dallas that can shoot from the perimeter. Christy Sides used the word undisciplined when describing the defensive performance, and that characterization points towards something that is fixable rather than structural. Undisciplined defense in a preseason game is not unusual. Teams are installing new coverages, players are learning where their help responsibilities begin and end, and the communication systems that experienced rosters take for granted are still being built. That does not make the performance acceptable, but it does contextualize it. The Fever are not a finished defensive product right now. The question is whether the effort and communication baseline is present, and whether players can absorb corrections quickly. What the coaching staff needs to see over the remaining preseason schedule is incremental improvement in defensive execution. Cleaner rotations, better communication on switches, more consistent contest quality on perimeter shots. Those improvements do not happen through motivation alone. They happen through film work, repetition, and individual accountability. The Fever have the personnel to be a competent defensive team. Whether they develop the habits and attention required to be won consistently is still an open question. The conditioning conversation that emerged after the game is one that warrants careful framing. Several observers noted that key players appeared fatigued relatively early in the game. This is not an uncommon finding in early preseason action. Players come into training camp with varying levels of game-ready conditioning, and the specific demands of live competition, the sprint-to-stop patterns, the defensive slide work, the physical contact expose gaps that individual conditioning work does not fully address. The Fever's preparation schedule, the structure of their training camp, and their management of individual players' workloads will all factor into how quickly that conditioning gap closes. What matters more than the observation itself is the response. If the Fever staff identifies conditioning as an issue and addresses it systematically over the next several weeks, it becomes a temporary preseason finding rather than a regular season liability. If it persists into the first weeks of the regular season, particularly through the condensed portions of the schedule, it creates cumulative effects on both performance and injury risk. Monitoring recovery, managing minutes thoughtfully, and maintaining a conditioning baseline through the competitive calendar are all operational decisions that fall to the coaching staff and the organization's sports science personnel. Sides acknowledged after the game that she may have extended her starters longer than was ideal, given the preseason context. That reflection is significant because it speaks to a broader challenge the Fever face this season, managing the tension between competitive outcomes and player development and health. The organization is operating in an environment where public expectation and media attention are higher than they have ever been in the franchise's history. There is pressure, externally and internally, to win, not just eventually, but immediately, visibly and convincingly. That pressure can lead to short-term decisions that create long-term costs. The most sustainable path for this team is not to chase results in games that do not affect the standings, but to use every preseason opportunity to build the habits, chemistry, and physical readiness that will matter in May and June. If the Fever finish the preseason with a winning record but arrive at opening night with a fatigued roster and underdeveloped defensive habits, they will have misused the available time. Sides knows this. Her post-game comments suggest she is aware of the tension. How she navigates it over the remaining preseason schedule will say a great deal about her readiness to manage a high-profile roster under significant external pressure. The atmosphere at the arena was notable and worth addressing separately from the performance itself. Attendance was strong. Fan engagement was loud and consistent throughout the game. The commercial and cultural moment around this Fever roster is real, and it has already translated into measurable interest in ticket sales, broadcast viewership, and merchandise. That environment creates something genuinely positive for the league and for professional women's basketball broadly. It also places a specific kind of pressure on the players inside it. Clark spoke about the anxiety of the first game, and that admission was both candid and grounded, High-profile environments amplify everything: the good plays and the mistakes, the confident moments and the frustrated ones. Players who have not previously operated under that level of consistent scrutiny often require an adjustment period before they can perform without that environmental pressure affecting their decision-making. Clark is aware of this. Her comments after the game reflected a player who is processing the experience analytically rather than being overwhelmed by it. That mental orientation is an asset. The broader fan sentiment around this team is notably more balanced and grounded than the national media narrative sometimes reflects. Viewers and supporters who follow the Fever closely express genuine appreciation for the players' maturity, accountability, and competitive spirit after this game. There was recognition that this was a first preseason game, that roster chemistry takes time, and that the presence of Clark, Boston, and Mitchell gives this team a real foundation to build from. That perspective, patient, informed, genuinely invested, is the relevant context for evaluating this loss. The team that takes the floor on opening night will not be the same team that lost to Dallas in a February preseason game. The defensive rotations will be cleaner. The offensive timing between Clark, Boston, and Mitchell will be more developed. The conditioning concerns will either have been addressed or will be in active remediation. The pick-and-roll actions that were inconsistent in this game will have had more repetitions. None of that is guaranteed, but it is the direction that organized professional preparation points toward. What this game confirmed, more than anything, is that the Indiana Fever have the talent and the interest base to be one of the most significant stories in women's professional basketball in 2025. Clark's performance, despite the physical limitations, despite the first-game pressure, demonstrated why she generates the attention she does. Mitchell's 30-point output confirmed that this team has more than one player capable of carrying an offensive burden on a given night. Boston's presence in the paint gives the Fever a skilled interior option that most of their opponents will have difficulty matching up against. The work ahead is real and specific. Defensive execution needs to improve. Offensive screening actions, particularly for Clark, need to be refined. The Clark-Boston pick-and-roll needs more development time. Conditioning and physical management need to be monitored carefully. The coaching staff needs to balance competitive urgency against long-term player health and development. None of those challenges are beyond the capacity of this roster and this organization to address. They are the normal work of a team in the early stages of a season, attempting to build something cohesive out of individual talent and collective effort. The Fever have not solved any of them yet. They have, in a single preseason game, identified them clearly enough to begin the process. That is what preseason is for.